Synth Network.
Hello everyone, it's just gone 7 p.m. here in the UK, 11 a.m. on the west coast of the US, 2 p.m. on the east, and wherever you are, wherever we may find you, welcome and thank you for joining. If you're watching this on catch-up, then where were you? Because you're missing all the fun bit. But anyway, if you're coming on catch-up or you're live, thank you ever so much for joining us. This is episode... Honestly, I don't know, 70 something, because I'm just too excited tonight to have bothered to check. So without further ado, let me welcome, first of all, our two co-hosts. Let's first of all go to the north of England and say hello to Ben Simpson. How are you, Ben?
I'm very well, very excited.
You good?
Yeah, not too bad.
Had a busy week?
Yeah, I've been, studio-wise, I've been writing.
Yeah.
I'm 4 tracks in now to my secret project, so quite happy about that. Well,
good stuff.
Yeah.
Excellent. And let's now go across to the United States of America. We're going to go to the West Coast twice now, but first of all, we're going to go to our very own Chris. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. It may as well be the north of England over here because it's cold and rainy and a delightful change for us.
Oh, that's not good. We've had a bit of a... I don't know what they call it. There's been a kind of a high pressure system going over the UK, so it's like visually it looks like autumn or fall, as you guys say, but temperature wise it's like late summer. It's been really, really warm, so it's been a little bit unnerving. But great to have you guys on board, and we've just got the most amazing guest today. I've got to admit I've got butterflies and I'm a little bit nervous, so please forgive me if I ramble on or stutter a little bit. Our guest this week is responsible for some of the most enduring pop and rock songs, probably of all time. Certainly one of my all-time favourite tracks ever, and we'll get into that later. We are beyond honoured and delighted to welcome Mr. Steve Porcaro.
Hey,
Hi.
guys.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Like Chris says, it's been overcast here, and that's a good day for me when it's overcast. It just makes me happy.
So, do we find you in your studio here?
Yes, this is my home studio.
Cool. And is this where you do most of your writing now?
It is. It's my home studio, but it was always very important for me that it be separate from the house. It's on a separate piece of slab, so
cool.
I can work back here in the middle of the night and not wake anybody up. I love it.
Excellent.
Nice.
It's always nice to have somewhere to go run to, I guess, isn't it?
Yes.
A nice little safe and cozy place. Well, there we are. All 4 of us, welcome. And let's just also say hello to everybody that's watching and contributing in the chat room. So I'm not going to go through names, but you're all there, all the regulars. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Could you please, if you wouldn't mind, share this link around your social media and all that kind of stuff, whatever the cool kids do nowadays, and let them know, because we've got an amazing guest, and there's going to be, I'm certain there's going to be some really great information coming across the internet over the next hour or so. So let's get right into it, I guess. I'm going to ask the first question of you, Steve, and I'm going to start at the very beginning, if you don't mind. So you come from, obviously, a very musical family yourself. Your father was a great drummer and percussionist. Your brothers were both in the band. And you know, Jeff is a huge hero of mine because as a drummer myself, I always tried to emulate him and always failed miserably. But such an extensive musical family. And I understand your instrument, like your father, the first instrument was drums, and then you moved on to keyboards afterwards. How did that all kind of work?
Well, there were always drums around the house. There was always a drum set set up. There was always a drum set set up right next to our stereo,
right,
where anybody could throw some headphones on, put on a record, and bash away, play along to your favorite record. So I guess always around.
I guess it helped that your father was a drummer as well, because it was much more tolerated in the house, whereas, you know, like my parents hated it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So what was your kind of introduction to keyboards? Because am I right in saying that you only had the one drum set, and so it was a kind of, you had to make a choice?
Yes. When the Beatles came out, when we saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show,
right.
Of course, both my brothers, Jeff and Mike, started taking guitar lessons from a friend of my dad's. I didn't. I had started taking piano lessons at a very early age, but I was a terrible student. When it would get difficult is when I would start dropping off and slacking off. And, my thing was that I just never gave up. I just kept up with the keyboards and kept up. And my dad would find another friend of his, another keyboard friend that would want to barter with him and would want him, because he was a great teacher. He was always a really good teacher with, writing drum books and definitely had a curriculum. So there was always friends of his, whether it was, there in Connecticut or here in LA, that would ask him to teach their kids drums. And he would keep coming home and say, hey, do you want to take lessons from, there'd be this guy and that guy. And I mean, it was quite an impressive list of teachers I have. Some of them were great teachers. Some of them weren't. Some of them were just, practicing professionals, and they didn't necessarily have a curriculum or a plan, but they would say, let's, I would get together with them. They'd say, what do you want to do? What do you want to learn? And so I had a very varied, eclectic kind of education. And again, when it would get difficult, I'd start sloughing off. I was always a horrible student, but I never gave up. I never gave up. And then, in the 60s there, in the late 60s, there was a big hit song, Light My Fire by the Doors. Mm-hmm. And that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was a big Doors fan, especially, that they had an organ player in the band. I really latched onto. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it kind of went straight to Emerson, Lake and Palmer and sure. A lot of studio guys like Leon Russell were my heroes also at the same time.
So your first keyboard instrument was what?
Was a piano.
Okay.
Was the household piano, a Spinet. I remember the day a truck brought it to our house in the projects in Hartford, Connecticut. And I started lessons right away with a friend of my dad's. I loved it. But then one Christmas, my dad got me, there was this company, Rheem, R-H-E-E-M. I mean, I think they're still around. They still make like air conditioners and heaters and stuff like that. But at the time, they made this little electronic organ. My dad got me an organ and a little bass amp to go with it. And I just was in heaven. And, right away started a band and played Light My Fire at least twice every dance.
Cool. So what was your introduction to the world of electronic instruments such as synthesizers? What was your first synth and how did that all come around?
Good question. In high school, I had a friend. I had kept hearing synthesizers here and there. I remember hearing Switched on Bach really got my attention. I was always drawn to quite frankly, bells and whistles. When I would see theater organs, with all the sound effects. I was at some kind of convention. I don't even remember what it was. Some kind of a trade show, and there was a very young kid. This is when I was 6 or 7 years old. There was a very young kid playing a theater organ, playing with the bass pedals and doing the whole thing and triggering different sounds and going to different keyboards. So right away I knew I was totally drawn to it.
Sure.
It looked like fun.
Yeah.
It looked like a lot of fun. But then, I soon after that, after moving to California, I heard Switched on Bach when that happened. And in 71, I went to my first real rock concert. And that happened to be Emerson, Lake and Palmer were headlining. We were there to see another band completely. But I saw, they tested the Moog before they went on, and my jaw dropped. It was cranked over this PA system. And I was like, what the fuck is that? And it was Keith Emerson, and my life was changed since then. What my first synth was, then I had a friend in high school, Jay Chernick, who he had a Hammond C3, he had a Mini Moog, he had a real Mini Moog. Now in those days, if you went to a music store that carried Mini Moogs, you'd have to show them your money before they would let you near one.
Sure.
It wasn't like the days of Guitar Center, which came after that. So he actually had a Mini Moog, and he actually had it was a very hip setup. He had an Oberheim DS2 digital sequencer, like serial number 5. I never even heard of that company. And he also had an Oberheim synthesizer expander module, SEM 1, I think it was called. It was like serial number 15 of that. Oberheim was just getting going. Nice. And he became a fast friend. You know what I mean? I hung out with this guy. And that wound up being my first rig. Now, a little prior to that, my dad, again, being in the studios at the time, the synth guy in the studio was a guy named Paul Beaver. And he had this studio in Hollywood where he used to rent out synthesizers and keyboards. He had a rental company, and he had this kind of warehouse studio where he had a whole bunch of Moogs set up. And I got to go down there and play with them. I didn't do much. I didn't really do anything interesting with it. These things had 9 oscillators, and I was convinced that's what must have made that huge sound I heard Keith Emerson making. It had to be 9 oscillators. No way was it just the 3 that were on a Mini Moog. So anyway, I went down there several times. When I first was driving, when I was 17 years old or so, early on. And but I wound up getting a gig at 17 with Gary Wright to go on the road and play Moog. And my brother Mike loaned me the money. Jay Chernick, my friend with that synth rig, he wanted to switch into piano. He wanted to sell all his synths and buy a grand piano. And so he sold me that rig, that Mini Moog, which was an incredible Mini Moog, by the way, with clear pitch wheels, engraved front panel. It wasn't silkscreen. This was very pre-CBS. Sounded amazing. And the Oberheim expander and the Oberheim digital sequencer. And that was my first synth rig.
I was watching a video earlier today of you playing with Gary, and you've got I wouldn't say it's a keytar, but you have a keyboard strapped over your shoulder. I didn't recognize it at all. Can you remember what that was?
Absolutely. We were opening. I was so lucky. It was such a great time period, and Gary, right off the bat, had great agents and great managers, and at one point we were opening for Jethro Tull for a month. We opened for Jethro Tull, and this was them at their peak. They were just amazing. Anyway, I remember one night we finished the gig. I had run out front. I was by the side of the stage. I got dressed real quick. I didn't miss one of Tull's shows. I stayed and saw every single one of them. And I was watching them. Gary's stuff, we had all our equipment was on like the scaffolding. He liked the look of it, and it made it easy for the forklifts to take our rigs off the stage, Anyway, I'm watching them take my rig off the stage, and there's my Mini Moog, my beloved Mini Moog, and I'm watching and this is like at a like a forum, like the forum in LA or Staples Center, your typical hockey rink or whatever, where the stage was built, and a lot of cement, and they picked up my rig, and the forklift bent back, and I watched my Mini Moog slide off the rig, and it actually landed like 10 feet away from me in pieces, And by the way, the wood, that was another thing about that Mini Moog. It was one solid piece of wood. Yeah. It wasn't glued together. It really was a beautiful Mini Moog. And I watched it smash in front of me. And just luckily, Gary had this technician, Alan, God, what was Alan's last name? And he took the keyboard and put it in a new wood case. It was not a keytar. It was just the Mini Moog keyboard. And it went around my neck, or I could put it in front of the Mini Moog, and he had this. If you see the connector, it's like this big on the Mini Moog. He did it for Gary too. Gary,
well, I saw that. I saw that.
So he did mine as well. I didn't have a choice. It was just, and I have that Mini Moog to this day.
Wow,
I do.
Amazing. Because I saw this clip because we did a thread on the group today. And I thought we'll post up some links to videos, great songs that you've been involved with. And somebody posted one of those tracks, and you're there in a red t-shirt and red pants, I think, and you've got this white keyboard over your shoulder, and I could see you doing something. There was a Mini Moog off to your left, I think. I could see that the panel, but now I realise that that was one and the same. It's amazing. Yep. So after Gary, you then moved on to Boz Scaggs. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was working with Gary, and while I was touring with Gary, my brother and David Page, and they were in the studio with Boz Scaggs making Silk Degrees. And the guys, they saw me with Gary. They saw how I could. Gary was the perfect gig for me. I just wanted to be on the road when I was that age. I just wanted to be in a band. I wanted to be playing in front of people, but I really didn't have the chops to be someone's accompanist or to really play, really be the keyboard player on a job. But Gary was perfect because it was mostly Moog bass. It was mostly, it was definitely as a synth guy. And, sure. So they saw that this was right when all of a sudden bands started bringing out a second keyboard player to cover the overdubs, to cover the synthesizer parts, to cover the string arrangements that were on the album. They were saying they could just bring out a second guy who would cover some of that stuff. And that was the case with Boz. I was brought out to do, there would be the basic meat and potatoes keyboards parts, piano or Rhodes, and then all the overdubs, which they did several on Boz's album, David did on Mini Moog, and/or there was lots of string arrangements, and they thought I'd be the perfect guy to cover that. It was another great gig, and I went right from Gary to that, and then actually once I had a break from Boz, went back and did a stadium tour with Gary with My Heroes, Yes, and Gentle Giant, and it was amazing. And Peter Frampton, it was just an amazing time.
I get the impression you are very much a prog guy. Would I be right?
Yep, I'm afraid so, guys.
No, it's a badge worth wearing with pride. I'm a huge Yes fan too, so that's really cool. So where did the session work? Because you clearly wrapped up with Boz, with Gary, but you were doing a lot of session work with your brothers and with others that then eventually led to the formation of Toto.
Yeah, well, my brother Jeff and to another extent, my brother Mike were in there. We were doing sessions. They were. This is another place where I was so fortunate because they were kind of there doing it, and synths were really becoming very popular. And where I used to worry about how am I going to compete with David Page and David Foster and Michael O'Mardian and all these great studio piano players. I realized that my interest in synthesizers and my getting good at it, and I always just worked well with others. I had a friend in school, Peter Rylick. We went to we were in elementary school together. He was a keyboard player. I thought I was hot shit when I was in elementary school, and this kid was a true child prodigy. And we became fast friends, and I realized I always loved working with other keyboard players. So a lot of these great, great players at the time, in the 70s, I mean, of course there were exceptions. I'm interrupting myself. Of course there were exceptions like Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock, but the general rule back then was the better you were as a player, the less you knew about synthesizers. You were too busy being an artist, a musician, to mess around with all those chords and all that technical stuff and keeping things in tune and the challenge that was synthesizers at the time. And the more you knew about synthesizers, the more no one wanted to hear you play. Guys, the guys that really knew about synths were kind of, the stereotypical thing was a guy with a pocket protector, was a nerd. You know what I mean? Those were the guys that knew the most about synthesizers. So I kind of saw this. There was this real obvious niche, this real obvious middle thing where I kind of became a programmer. James Newton Howard, all these guys. That's whereas I normally would have never worked on the same sessions with them. They wound up hiring me. Yeah. David Foster wouldn't do a synth date unless I was sitting there next to him, programming and tuning and sometimes coming up with parts. Sure. I really worked well with others, and I don't think they felt threatened by me. I wasn't trying to get their gig. I loved just being on the team and being part of it. And I wound up getting to work on all these amazing records that these guys were hired for. And they would tell the producer, look, I want you to hire this guy, so I was real lucky.
If I can, just to skip a little bit ahead in the history, we can circle back. But since we're on that topic, one of the things that we were talking about, the three of us, in regards to your work with synthesizers, was want to ask you about your specific role within Toto. So you had worked along all these other keyboard players doing session work, and when it came to working with David, how did you guys define your roles? And maybe you can break it into kind of two parts. As a player, like what parts did you and he tend to play, and then also how did this sound design work its way into Toto sessions?
Sure. Again, that's why I was asked to join Toto. I could never lose track with that fact that David Paich was on fire. He had just wrote all except I think one song, co-wrote all except one song on Boz Scaggs' Silk Degrees. He was while we were doing Toto, he'd go down the hall and produce Cheryl Lynn, and it'd be a hit single. He was just David, as a keyboard player, as a songwriter, as a producer, was just on fire. He was our fearless leader. He was the guy. I was asked to join the band strictly because of the programming thing, to assist him, to cover his overdubs live. I would program for him in the studio and then cover his overdubs live. Now, of course, over time, my job description changed. I you know what I mean? I wasn't going to be happy just doing that forever. That changed very quickly. And I started bringing my own things to the table. He didn't show up one day in the studio, and I was just like, everybody was wringing their hands and pissed off that he wasn't there. And I was like, hey, I wrote a tune yesterday. You want to try it? And and it wound up on our first album, Taking It Back. You know, I was always glad to fill in the space, and I always, not that I ever stopped programming for him and didn't love. We were kind of a team. We were. I felt like we were a team. We would do a lot of sessions together, and you know, David would execute, even if it was my song. Sometimes I would show David what the keyboard part was, and then I'd want him to play it, to execute it on the record, because he was just so solid and locked in. And my brother Jeff loved his time, and you know, he would do it even on my song. We were a team, you know. If synths were needed, I was the geek, you know. I was the synth geek, and but you know, a lot of times, even when I'd be programming these sequences of 30-second notes flying by, those would be David's notes. You know, David would. I'd show him what spaces we need filling in, and you know, and all of a sudden, if someone needed some real jazz chops, you know, we used to call it was tag team. You know, Dave, you're in. You know, so I wasn't afraid of anything, you know, because I had my my big brother behind me. You know?
Yeah.
Did you guys? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Chris.
I was wondering, did you guys have kind of a routine as far as the instruments themselves go? Like, if it was, you know, a piano part, one of you would do it. If it was more of a synth part, one of you would do it. Something like that.
Absolutely. For the most part, if it was a meat and potatoes keyboard part, David would do it. You know, if we're talking about the piano or the Rhodes. It's not like I would never, ever, ever do a piano part, but for the most part, even on my own song, I would ask him again to execute the part. You know, I mean, if you know, I would hear about how it, like with Steely Dan, how Donald Fagen, who was just a fine piano player, but how he would record his piano part for a song. Michael Omardian would transcribe it, and then he'd have Michael Omardian play it in the studio, execute it.
Yeah.
Just because of his time, his pocket, his chops, his finesse. It was better. It'd be exactly his notes, and you know, we would do that in the band. So yeah, for the most part, and look, Dave had a lot of ideas synth-wise, and Dave could play great Moog bass. He played fantastic Moog bass. So yeah, we'd encourage each other, and a lot of times it was me. You know, Dave would have a definite idea on a synth, but I'd be right there tweaking it for him, programming it. Yeah.
I get the impression there's a lot of love for David Paich from you. I think there's a huge amount of respect there. We have a question from one of our people in the chat room, Robarth, who's asking, do you have any synth heroes of your own? I imagine that probably David is one of them, but who else kind of inspires you as a hero, somebody you look up to?
Well, synth heroes, you know what I mean? Right off the bat, I think of Keith Emerson and you know, that entrance in Tarkus when I heard that. Synth heroes, Rick Wakeman. You know, if you know anything about synths and using them live, the way you know, sometimes for the big dance, I'd rent an ARP Odyssey, or you'd see guys that for the big gig, they would rent a mini Moog for the big gig, you know, back in the day, and it would always be a disaster. You know, it usually would be a disaster. Those instruments, you gotta, you know, the way you use them live, the way, you know, how delicate it is for it to sound the way you want them to, and to be able to control them and contain them. You know, Rick Wakeman was a master at that stuff. Yeah. Kerry Minier, those guys are huge. And then, of course, there was guys like Tomita and Patrick Gleason, you know, those guys that did albums. Who am I leaving out? You know, Wendy Carlos, of course. These were huge synth heroes, you know, back in the day.
Yeah, sure. Let's kind of turn the conversation towards gear. And I think one of the main things, I think, you know, in terms of gear that comes up when you talk of Steve Porcaro is the Polyfusion. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your history with the Polyfusion, back then, and is it something that's still part of your life now?
Yes, and yes. At the time back then, there weren't a lot of, there was the Oberheim expander module. There was this self-contained synthesizer, but I wanted, again, if you remember, my very first rig included this thing called an Oberheim DS2 digital sequencer. And I used it quite a bit. I used it quite a bit on sessions. I would write out really fast. I would write out fast synth lines. I loved the interface, the way it worked. I could just kind of, load things in real slow, play them back fast, but be able to re-trigger them, reset it, load 3 different chords into the 3 different banks it had, and just kind of, it would sound like I was playing 30-second notes through chord changes. And it was just re-triggering, hitting the reset button on these banks. And then one day I all of a sudden saw that Roland, and I used to always think, at the time I had just taken arranging classes. I had learned how to do block harmony for saxophones. There you go. Yeah. There's the DS2. I had started doing things like that. And I started thinking, wow, what if I could do that? Like in block harmony, or do 3-part harmony, flutes playing 30-second notes flying around. How cool would that be? And lo and behold, I see that Roland's coming out with this thing, an 8-channel digital sequencer, this thing called a microcomposer, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to have this, I'm the guy, they made this for me. Long story short, it was very different than I thought it would be. It was a very different beast. But, one of the first things about it was this 8-channel sequencer, and you needed 8 synthesizers to play it. There was no Jupiter 8 right then. There was nothing other than those Oberheim modules that would play. You needed 8 synthesizers. So I, right at that time, I had even gotten my first microcomposer, and I was, would borrow a friend's 2600, and I had my Mini Moog, of course, was the bass synth, and but it was challenging to come up with enough voices for it. And Polyfusion I was on the road with Toto. Polyfusion reached out to us, and again, long story short, it wasn't really about synthesis for me so much, but I just wanted 8 rack-mounted Mini Moogs. Was the first Polyfusion system that Roger Lynn actually put together for me. Wow. And it just was essentially 8 Mini Moogs, 2 oscillators, 2 envelopes, a VCA, a VCF, and, a couple mixers times 8. And then we did that twice, David and I. We did that twice. We had 2 of those systems. So there they are, Wow. There they are. And then, from that, I got into, they started hitting me to other modules. I started getting into a little more of the synthesis thing. But for the most part, it was just all about, voices. Yeah. It was voices. And guys, within a year after getting that, it became, I think my Jupiter 8s had analog inputs, and my Emulator 1 had analog inputs, and it became much easier to do that. But I love the thing of it being truly multi-timbral and being able to get a different sound on each voice of my microcomposer.
And are you still using that actively today?
Right now, there was a long period where I wasn't using it, and Polyfusion is back alive now. Yeah. And they've so very generously have offered. They took, I had brought I'd gotten all my cool stuff that was in storage, all of it, the things that really meant something to me. I pulled them out of storage finally, and I had all the Polyfusion stuff out and set up here in my studio. And, I was realizing they were going to need a lot of work. you know, a lot of work. Even though they were very well protected in cases and well taken care of, those things need time spent with them and a lot of love. And actually, and right at that time, I got contacted by Polyfusion. They were putting the company back together, and they offered to completely rebuild on their dime my entire system.
Oh, amazing.
Wow. That's brilliant.
Wow.
Which is what they're doing now. They can you see it? There it is. They I guess I got to go this way. There's there's Rudis. There's a little piece of it that they finished.
Oh wow.
Wow.
But as we speak, they're working on those 2 huge systems that you just put up on the screen.
Yeah.
They're
Awesome.
completely rebuilding them module by module.
Wow.
Very
so
generously. Yeah, they've been at it for like a year now.
Cool.
But we stay in touch, and they're coming out with a keyboard, you know, with a synth keyboard. I'm very excited about for them. And yeah, so it'll be back here. It'll be back here. I love that stuff. I loved it. It was Polyfusion stuff was so great to learn on. It was all these big 1/4-inch jacks. There was nothing patched in the back. There was nothing pre-patched. So you had to patch everything. And so it really was an amazing synth to learn on.
Yeah.
To learn control voltage on. And boy, once it sank in, it all of a sudden, I just kind of started looking at the world differently. I all of a sudden was looking at the jacks on the back of all my synthesizers, all those inputs, all those control inputs that no one ever uses. Even on my CS80, the external input that I don't know if I've ever seen anybody use it. All of a sudden, I had an envelope generator that was being triggered from a drum machine, and it's going as I'm holding chords and doing poly aftertouch, and I'm just you know. I look at our VSO on our tape machine. I'm like, does that have a control voltage input? Sure enough, it did. And I'm playing our 24 track on a keyboard. You know what I mean?
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
Great times.
Going back to gigging live with Toto and that, you've had some large keyboard rigs over the years. I think I've seen you with 2 CS80s on several occasions and some pretty impressive rigs and that. But more recently, you've, I believe you've gone with main stage. What's the reasoning for that, and how difficult was it, like recreating those classic sounds for the Toto live set?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, I wanted to do my, you know what I mean, live out my Keith Emerson wet dream of having, you know, modular stuff live and really using it. You know what I mean? It was a big deal to me that it was not there for looks, but was actually being used, and it was. You know, those were those days. It was, you know, you jump to another keyboard to recreate what you did on the record. You know, and I kind of did that, and you know, I was out of the band for a very long time. I thought I was done. You know, after 87 or 88, whenever it was, I stopped touring with the guys. You know, I started using MIDI to a certain extent, even then at the end with Toto. But this time coming back, you know, when I actually looked at, you know, I know when I first got Logic and I see there's this application main stage, and I just kind of tossed it aside. I didn't know really what it was. Someone said, yeah, it's a thing for live, and I didn't pay any attention to it. When Toto asked me, like in 2010, if I'd consider doing some runs with him, I was like, let me take a look at this, because I'd seen some people have it, you know, have some aspect of it in their setup, have a laptop running main stage, but then they still had a ton of other keyboards. And when I looked at it, I was kind of like, you know what? This is everything I could have ever wanted. This was really the promise of MIDI. The way you could have a controller, a foot pedal, go to 3 different things, each with a different curve, the way you could split the keyboards. And it became, I says, you know what? I did that multi-keyboard thing, you know, I did that. Let me go completely the other way. Let me see if I can do a show just in main stage, just two keyboards, whatever kind of foot controllers. I was going to have bass pedals, you know, just to help me trigger stuff. But let me see if I could do a show in just main stage. And actually, especially the later stuff that was, you know, post MIDI, I was able to, you know, you're able to incorporate those exact plugins. I was able to have the sounds that I actually used on some of the later Toto records. And by the way, I was always involved in Toto's records, even after I was out of the band. You know, they would always come to me for some synth stuff, you know, whether it was programming for David or really whoever was in the band at the time. I would always kind of do some synth work on it. And I just embraced it. I didn't want it to be that and then a couple of the things. I wanted to see, why couldn't I just completely use main stage? You know, Logic does this very cool thing where it'll even just take an acoustic keyboard or some other synth that doesn't have MIDI, and it's got this system of sampling it, you know, so that it becomes just a sampler instrument. And yeah, and I've never had rules. I've never had you know, I've never had rules about, you know, I have no problem cheating, you know, when it comes to synth. I love playing, you know, I don't mind playing a part on keyboard. And then if I need to grab something else, I'll sample the last 8 notes I'm going to play and trigger it while I'm running over here, you know, and have a sample of me playing those last 8 notes of the run, and I'll combine both things. And you know, my job is just to pull it off live and make it look easy. You know, that was the important thing. You know, like Wakeman used to be able to do. He'd have that decay on his Mini Moog set just right. He would hit that decay switch and he'd walk over to another keyboard, and it would just, the release would just be perfect for when he started the next thing. You know, the way he had that stuff mastered was always very, very impressive to me. And I wanted my stuff to look easy like that.
With that 2 keyboard setup and using main stage, what does a typical song look like? How are you differentiating what you're playing on each of the keyboards? Just have 2 separate presets set up for it, or what? How?
No, it was very complicated for the most part. You know, it was very complicated. There'd be a lot of, you know, I did a lot of synth parts, and a lot of things were maybe so subtle people would never notice, but I did, and I loved pulling that stuff off live. I would split the keyboard multiple times. It would change over the course of the song. The bottom keyboard was an 88-note weighted action thing, so that got a lot of the piano, you know, keyboard kind of stuff like that, Rhodeses and Wurlitzers. And the top guy was a typical non-weighted action, and that would get all the Hammond parts and all the synth parts. And you know, I'd split things up, you know, however I had to pull it off, you know.
Cool. I'm going to bring it back because I want to indulge myself in the Toto IV album era, because for me that's just classic. The first question I wanted to ask about Toto IV was, the first 3 albums were great albums, but I guess you were, certainly the reviews had Toto down as these session guys just, you know, coming up with stuff. And then Toto IV just, it landed and just kind of shook the world. Was there an enormous amount of validation when Toto IV was as successful as it was?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of, you know, I mean, each song on there could have been a single. I think that era, sort of 82, 85, so many albums came out where every track could have been a single. And I've been listening to the album all day again today, which is, you know, something I do quite often. And it really is. Every single track on there could be a top 10 hit single anywhere in the world at any time. And Rosanna, for me, is the pinnacle. And it's not only the pinnacle of that album, but it's the pinnacle of many great pop songs because it has everything you could possibly want. You've got the greatest groove. Your brother, just that groove is unbelievable. It makes me cry. I genuinely shed tears sometimes listening to that, mainly because I've tried my entire life to recreate it and I can't. It just makes me want to give up. And then you've got that I guess it's David's piano, which is just, rumbling along. It's just the groove is there, and then the bass, and then there's the vocals. I believe you share the vocals with Bobby. Is that
no? Steve Lukather.
Oh, that's it. Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. So, and then your keyboard solo, which is just, and then when you think the song's ending, it goes into this amazing kind of just like jazzy riff thing, and you're just like, it's. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of recording that particular track? Because it didn't take long. Am I right?
Well, it didn't take long for the track to be cut, that's for sure. But, that was, thank you, by the way.
No, thank you.
Yeah, the stars aligned. There was the right, I think this is true with a lot of bands. As far as, with bands, there's so many factors at play. And, just as far as just within the band, as far as the politics within the band and the power structure and the stars just really aligned on that. I had, what would be of interest to everyone here is that I on the first records, I wanted my work with Toto to be different than my work with everyone else. Mm-hmm. Now, the guys in the band used to always, they'd beg me. I was good at going in on a Quincy Jones date and in 3 hours doing 4 songs, doing the synths on 4 songs or whatever it was, and being done with it. That was their session to do the synths on those songs, and that's why I got hired as much as I did, was because I could be so fast and so to the point. Now the guys in Toto would just beg me to do the same thing on a Toto album. Why can't I get it done like that? And I'd have the whole, we produced ourselves. So usually, if you're in the studio, if you're doing a session, there's 5 other guys, looking over your shoulder, wondering what's taking so long. Working on synths can be like, watching paint dry. It can be. So on the third album, I had an idea. David and I had set up at his house. We had set up all our synthesizers. We're all set up in one place. And while the guys were, what I decided to do was we had this huge setup, all our synths, the Polyfusion, the micro composers, everything was set up in one place. And I thought we had gotten an 8-track. We got an Otari 8-track tape recorder. And I thought, here's what I'll do. I'll transfer the rhythm tracks of these songs to 2 tracks of the Otari, and then I'll experiment. I'll use the remaining 6 tracks to figure out what I want to do on these songs. Once it's time to do synths, and then I'll do all my experimenting here, and then when it's time to do synths, I'll walk in and do some really cool stuff. Well, I killed myself on those 8 tracks. I would fill up it with DS2 sequences and then bounce it down to 1 track with the tape slap. And I wound up doing all these things that I'd never be able to recreate in a million years. A lot of what I did on there was just, there was magic. I had stumbled on magic sometimes. I treated it like it was a master. I didn't treat it like I was just demoing synth parts. And the end result wound up being, to this day, no one has ever heard that stuff. The guys in the band never heard that stuff.
Where is it?
I wound up still having my couple days to do what to do what needed to be done. And no one ever heard most of that stuff. There might have been a couple things that sounds I came up with that I wound up bringing in the studio. But for the most part, it was heartbreaking. To me. Now, could I have flown some stuff across? Possibly, you know what I mean? But there was just a ton of magic lost. So when Toto IV came around, the only difference between the setup in the studio was that instead of it being an Otari 8-track, it was two 24-track tape machines.
Right.
And even at the time, when I told them I wanted them to make me, what we called slaves at the time, you know what I mean, where they would bounce down the rhythm track and put it on a couple tracks, and I would have 22 tracks to experiment with. The guys were like, "You're no engineer," you know what I mean? We're not gonna, we were such perfectionists, and I wasn't an engineer. But from that third album, our engineer on that album, Jeff Workman, and him and I, by the way, really bumped heads making that record, but he wound up hanging out with David and I long after the record was made. And I just started asking him really stupid questions. Why wouldn't what I recorded on my own be able to be used? And he taught me about gain structure. We had this Trident Flexi Mix board, which was so cool because even the effect sends had meters, had VU meters on it going out. I would have stupid questions like, how do I know when I'm sending a signal to a harmonizer or to one of my tape echoes, how do I know I'm sending it the optimum signal? Where do I turn things up? When? It was really just basic gain structure that I was wanting to know about. And this guy very patiently taught me all about zero VU in those days. And I removed any excuse why my stuff couldn't be used. I didn't touch EQ. I didn't touch compression. I just made it sound good from the synths themselves. And I was able to do things like, the Rosanna solo I spent a couple of weeks on. I mean, some of that time was squandered on nonsense, but I was able to really do what I wanted to do. I was able to write it out. I was able to imagine stuff. David was a big part of that. We just wanted to go around the room and use every synth that was in there. And it was great because it was on, especially because look, it was on the song Rosanna, where my brother Jeff is playing this amazing part. And there's this amazing Jerry Hay, David Page horn arrangement, and, the stars aligned. And while I wasn't a great keyboardist, I wasn't a great soloist. I still am not to this day. I don't blow jazz through chord changes. I looked at that solo like a composer. You know what I mean? And what would be the ultimate keyboard solo? Exploiting all this stuff, and I got to do it, and on such a cool record. Yeah. So, I'm proud of it to this day too.
Yeah, and so you should be. And I just wanted to kind of follow up on that. I mean, first of all, your brother's drum groove on that, as I say, it's one of the greatest grooves of all time. I listened to it and I'm blown away by it. You grew up with Jeff, and you were working with Jeff, day in, day out for many years. When he came up with that, when he, in the studio, when that was the thing he came up with, was it as mind blowing to you then as it is to us still to this day?
Not at all. It was just kind of what Jeff did.
Right.
That's what Jeff did. You would see him. He would. That's the thing, is those were, luckily Jeff, his influences growing up were kind of unique to Jeff, where most of his heroes weren't guys that did big, huge drum solos and stuff. It was his heroes were studio musicians like Jim Keltner and Jim Gordon, and guys where time and groove and pocket were of the essence. And along with that, though, he was in love with a guy like John Bonham, you know what I mean, who was not one of those guys. And that was Jeff just combining what he did all the time. He combined things. I'm going to do this kind of a thing on the kick drum and this thing on this part, and we all admired, he admired, Bernard Purdy. We used to listen to Aretha Franklin. Who was the sax player? You know what I mean? With her, stuff that Bernard Purdy was playing drums on. Yeah. We were always huge fans of that from when we were kids. And Jeff just kind of was this alchemist that way, and would be able to put it together in a way that no one else could. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? His influences, believe me, a lot of the jazz guys and whatever who maybe influenced a bunch of studio guys, they weren't that aware of John Bonham and his influence. That was Jeff putting all those elements together.
And with regards to the synthesizers that we used on Rosanna, you know, for example, on those lead parts, but also throughout the song, it's often stated on the internet of all places that it was one of the most kind of prominent uses of the early Yamaha FM technology. And I can hear my audience groaning because, oh yeah, Rob's brought up FM. But was it the GS1 that was used on Rosanna or Africa, or sort of certainly on that album?
Yes. GS1 was it just was. We had just gotten it. It was. I think I used it on the Celeste parts on the second verse of Rosanna.
Right.
You know?
And what about the solos?
That prominent yet? You know.
What did you use for the solo parts?
On the solo lead line, you know, was Polyfusion, but I was actually the keyboard I was using to play the Polyfusion was a Prophet 5 that also had my trumpet blip sound, you know.
Yes, which I've been watching, and I'm planning to spend this weekend doing some recreating, because we were talking earlier before we came on the air that there's this series. I guess it was just like one video that's been chopped up over time and thrown onto YouTube, which must have been recorded sort of mid to late 80s, where you're going through a whole bunch of stuff and you go through the trumpet blip sound. And I had a conversation with David Gamson from Scritti Politti and Michelle Indegiacello and so on. And he did something very similar, but using the FM, the very sort of rapid attack on an FM sound, and layering that with things like brass sounds or bass sounds to get the kind of the kick, that punchy part at the very beginning. And it's those little techniques that really fascinate me.
Yes.
But can you very briefly explain what your technique is, that brass technique?
Yeah, you know, one of the things when I first got my modular stuff, I was very excited, but I had no idea what I was doing whatsoever. And one album that had just come out recently was Frank Zappa's Chic Your Booty album. And on it, there's this brilliant keyboard break on a song called Your Mama. There's this synth keyboard break that's just amazing. Tommy Mars, I believe, is the guy. Frank had a CS80. And by the way, CS80s were kind of using this weird hybrid linear organ kind of technology that wasn't real. You know, I mean, everything didn't play well with each other. This is before MIDI, and there were very few. You know, the only input was this control input, the CV input that I later exploited, but it really didn't have any output so that you could play any of the synthesizers. Well, this guy that I wound up knowing, this crazy technician guy, wound up interfacing Frank's CS80 with an EMU modular system, and anyway, this synth break in Yo Mama was just amazing, and there were these amazing brass sounds. And Roger Lynn and I were working very closely together in those days, and he helped me put it together. And I played that for Roger, and I said, "What is that? How are they getting that sound? I need that sound." You know, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And Roger right away knew what it was. It was very simply, you know, one oscillator being blipped, you know, and sending an envelope generator just with a little bit of decay to one of two oscillators, so that it would blip out of tune at the very beginning of the note, which of course we all learned is what gives instruments their definition, is that attack. And you know, where synths needed help making the attack more complicated. And Roger showed me that. Now look, I could have done that on an Oberheim synthesizer expander module. You could send their filter envelope. One of the envelopes could be sent to one of the oscillators. You know, a Prophet 5 did it right away. You would use the filter envelope, but you could not do that on a mini mode. to me, that was kind of a glaring omission. I don't know why they didn't have that, so you could just use the filter, to send it to a oscillator, but it didn't. Not until, who are the guys? Well, they're going to be mad at me. The guys who modified, the mini Moogs. It'll hit me again. St. Regis. Anyway. So Roger showed me this, and it became so obvious how to do it. And then just to let you know, what wound up, what still takes a modular synthesizer to do is to also add the spit, which is a pretty fast LFO going and being gated by another, an LFO going through an amplifier that's being gated by another very short envelope, and that going to the filter, that being added to the filter of the sound, and it just gives it this spit at the beginning. It just complicates the beginning of the sound.
Yeah.
And I've been exploiting that one way or another ever since.
Cool. Guys, have you got any questions you want to throw?
Yeah, I mean, since we're geeking out in that era for a moment, like maybe a little bit more, as I've heard so many people talk about Africa and what synths were used, and I'd just love to hear, like, just, straight from the horse's mouth, how did those parts come together? What synthesizers did you use? Let's geek all the way out.
Yeah, no, the important thing again is that, there was CS80, the brass preset, brass 1 and 2 preset throughout Africa. The real cool thing is that to talk about is the GS1, which was this unprogrammable 4-operator FM synth. Now the DX7, this is typical with synthesizers, right, guys? Where the DX7, you could program it. It had 6 operators. For all intents and purposes, you should have been able to get every sound that you got on a GS1 and even better. For all intents and purposes, it had all the components, the hardware that a GS1 had. But you know what? And we were very lucky where we knew, because of my relationship with Yamaha, this guy Gary Leuenberger, who's still a friend of mine, and I know there was another guy, Dave Bristow, an English gentleman, who was doing a lot of voicing. They called it, a lot of programming for the presets of the GS1. Yeah. And Gary Leuenberger in particular got together with us, with David and myself, and we really tweaked these kalimba marimba sounds that were used throughout Africa, with some tape slap on the break. And those were some custom GS1 sounds that I never came close to getting on any other FM synth. There was something very special. It was one of those examples where they improved something, and the magic is gone, though.
Yeah.
So that's the main thing to talk about as far as Africa goes.
I was interested in when I was watching some of your videos, how you seem to have this like problem solving ability. You was using a sequencer with your thumbing technique, to record all these fast passages into another sequencer and then playing them back. And I really admired that ability, to use the technology. It maybe not the way it's supposed to be used, but to get the results you want from it. I think that's great. I was wondering if, like, with current technology, do you still find yourself doing anything like that? Have you got any like crazy workarounds or tips that you use, or do you think that everything's so easy to do now that you don't necessarily have to?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It again, where things are, so much better. A lot of those things I fell into just because of overlapping technologies at the time. Once you're in Logic for 10 years or whatever, there's not a whole lot overlapping. And I try to recreate some of that stuff. Logic has a feature called touch tracks, that for all intents and purposes can pretty much recreate what I did thumbing a DS2 or a DSX, but you know what? It's not quite the same. And that kind of leads us to me finding myself getting up these old synths going, you know what? I know I've moved past this. I know, you know, this new stuff supplanted the old stuff, and at some point you got to let things go, or the setup gets too unwieldy. You kind of look back and you miss stuff, when you're always keeping up with the technology, you're moving and moving, but then all of a sudden I'd realize, like, I miss my CS80. You know what I mean? I know it doesn't have, MIDI in or out, so it kind of makes it obsolete, but it was like, that was an axe for me, the way I used it, the way I used the pedals, the way I used the pitch ribbon, the way the way the aftertouch was, my GS1, that's the basic road sound on Human Nature on Thriller, with that poly aftertouch. Maybe it doesn't stand out when you listen to the record, but I've heard some of the isolated tracks online, and it just, all those little things add up. All those little things add up. Sometimes you go past this stuff with wanting to have the newest and the latest, and stuff gets lost, things get lost.
So how does that work for you then now in 2021? I think oftentimes watching our favorite artists who've been making records over the years, we long for that golden era where they use those, very classic instruments like the CS80 or the vintage Les Paul or whatever it is. For you in your studio in 2021, what part will some of those classic instruments make? Because you talk very fondly of them. I know you've used a modern rig with the main stage playing live, of course, because that's going to make things a lot easier. But you got your Polyfusion being worked on. Are you expecting to get out some of the other classics from storage?
I have been. This is the thing, is some of this stuff, it sits there. The last time you used it, it was fine, but when it's sitting in this hard anvil case and being very well protected. But it turns out when I've pulled out my 2600s, when I pull out my Oberheim OB8s, all of this stuff, my GS1s, I had 3 of them, and you pull them out, and just, whether it's batteries leaking and destroying motherboards, or just things not working anymore because of certain capacitors just died over time or whatever. But I've been trying to recreate stuff that, our good friend Marcus Ryle, who pretty much designed all that cool Oberheim stuff. He's, he sold his company Line 6 to Yamaha, and he's been a great friend and has actually been fixing my old Oberheim stuff. Whether my DS2 sequencers are actually, I had 2 OB8s with my DSX sequencers that I used to thumb also. And Marcus has helped me bring those back to life with a lot of hard work. But it's difficult. You also want to keep those techniques in mind and just try to keep that spirit going when it comes to new stuff. And there's certain things that are worth it to, like, to keep them working and keep them running, and realize that you used it in a way that's still valid to this day. Nothing has replaced that. And so I'm always working hard at getting keeping that old stuff up and working. And at the same time, looking ahead, just trying to keep that mindset of that creative mindset when you're looking at the new stuff.
So perhaps on the other side of the question of, like, restoring that classic gear and get it going again. In the meantime, especially as you've been playing live using Mainstage, what have been some of your favorite synths or soft synths that you've been using?
Well, doing Mainstage live, that was kind of a separate thing. That was that was for the live thing. Mainstage, now that I've stopped touring again, and I'm kind of hoping this is it for me touring wise, I really love being in the studio. I'm not a road guy. It was fun. It's fun to go out and tour for a little bit, but I'm a studio rat, and I just love being in the studio. And new synths that I'm get excited about are mostly of the soft variety, things like Zebra, things like John Lemkule's Unify. You know, I love the Spectrasonic stuff. I love, you know, a lot of the, you know, Spectrasonic new stuff. It's all very exciting to me. It gives me all the features I've ever wanted and more. And and I want to spend the time. So that was the thing, you know, that old stuff we talk about, whether we're talking about a CS80 or a Prophet 5, you know, or a Jupiter. I knew these synths inside and out. You know, I you know, an OB8. I knew these synths inside and out. I was such a student and always looking to make, you know, better and bigger sounds and but now, you know, I suffer from the same option anxiety everybody does, and there's so much cool stuff out there. It's, you know, and if you start doing film work and you don't have time to really dig in, and you find you're just kind of poking through presets going, wow, that's really cool, and just barely, you know, how do I get under the hood there, and how do I change that, you know, that phaser depth or whatever it is you want to get in there. I want to master these things. I want to really know them inside and out. So it's difficult for me because you get so bombarded with new cool stuff. You know?
Yeah.
There's stuff coming out all the time, isn't
You know,
there?
that's how I got to that point where of what you're talking about, thumbing things, playing one sequencer into the other. It was because so much time was spent with those things. You know?
Yeah. I won't forgive myself if I don't ask you about your association with Yamaha, and you know our audience will expect nothing less. You guys, you and David were kind of synonymous with Yamaha in the 80s at that time when the DX7 landed in 83, and you know you were all over the place. You know your rigs were Yamaha rigs. I mean, there's always, I'm going to throw this up on the screen and I apologize profusely now, but there was the cartridge that you guys put together for I think AVIC, wasn't it, that went into the DX7. You are synonymous with.
Who knew that Michael Knight played Synthesizer there?
All right.
But you are famous for for using the DX synths, and you watch any Toto videos from that era, and there's KX88s, DX7s, DX9s, DX1s. What are your fond memories? Do you have any fond memories of those synthesizers? What were your favorites, and how did you utilize them across the studio and live work?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag because I have a big problem with a lot of the FM stuff. Later on, by the way, to kind of just start at the end, I don't know if you guys remember what an SY77 was. It was, I think everyone agrees in some ways that Yamaha kind of stayed at the FM party a little too long. But one thing that the SY77 did was that you could use, instead of it being all sine waves, FM with all sine waves, you could use a sample as a modulator. You could take they would take the carrier wave would be a subsonic, would be a real low sine wave, and you could modulate it with a sample. And so it pretty much was kind of recreating a sample, but yet it had all that great FM key scaling and envelope scaling up and down the keyboard that made it such a great instrument. The things that we try to do in synthesis. I mean, my Polyfusion, I have voltage controlled envelope generators where I'm able to, take a negative keyboard voltage. The higher up I'm going on my keyboard, I can make my decay a little shorter, like it does on a piano, like it does on most instruments. Yeah. That was some of the great stuff about a DX7, was that key scaling stuff that made it such an instrument, but they didn't pay much attention to that. You know what I mean? Not enough attention was paid to that in my opinion. Yeah. And there just was too much of that Rhodesy, tiny, trying to recreate that Leeds E Rhodes that became so popular, that the George Duke kind of funky Rhodes, which I was right there with everybody. You know what I mean? I was loving those sounds for a while. Just a lot of the DX stuff hasn't aged well for me personally.
Sure.
I'm being honest. Now, to back up with Yamaha, when Toto was first starting, I went to this place, David A. Bell Music, had a store. They sold synthesizers. They were the exclusive Yamaha dealer in LA. And they showed this, they had a synthesizer in there called a CS80. And every keyboard player in town was freaking out over it. It was amazing. It was the first time I put the headphones on. I played the brass preset, and it was like the promise of a poly Moog. It kind of, it wasn't the Moog sound, but it sounded fat, and all 8 voices sounded really cool. It wasn't organ-like really at all. It was amazing. And everybody in town wanted one. They had this huge waiting list. You had to give them like $1,500 just to get on the waiting list. And it was going to be months and months and months and months before any of us saw CS80. Now Toto's starting off, and I wanted this to be my big synth. Starting off with Toto, I wanted it to be my axe with the band. I saw it as. And suddenly I get a phone call from my brother Mike, who's in Japan with Larry Carlton, and he goes, "Steve, this CS80 that you're raving about is on every corner. Every music store has one. All over Japan. They're everywhere here. Do you want one?" Is this a trick question? You know what I mean? He got me one, shipped it to the States, and I had a CS80. Right away, it started screwing up, as CS80s do. I contacted Yamaha. They said, "Look, you've got this in Japan. You just have to go to, we're dealer service. You have to go to your factory authorized service center," which I did. And when I picked it up 10 days later, not only hadn't they fixed anything that was wrong with it, but there were like 5 more things broken just by this guy opening it up and messing around in there. So I called Yamaha. I somehow got a hold of this dealer service number. I called the guy, John Gatz, there, and he says, "Look, bring it in." This is at Buena Park. I live in LA. This is a ways away. He said, "Bring it in and we'll get it going for you once. We'll get it perfect for you. And then you're on your own." And I said, "Fine." But, and their technician, this guy, Jim Smerdell, started working on it. And every time he'd fix it, and he was very capable and would fix it, but within a week, something else would happen with it. Something else, I was using it in the studio all the time. I was using it with Toto, and some other minor thing would happen, and I would take advantage of this offer and bring it back in. So they got used to seeing me there all the time. And a couple of years later, they started this artist program, and the guys in the dealer service thing said, "Steve, you'd be like the perfect guy." Toto had made hit records by then. I was totally obsessed. They knew I knew what I was talking about with this synth and could really show them the details of what was working and what wasn't. Jim and I came up with some mods. We had a split keyboard on mine, and he gave me a unison switch. And through this guy Doug Buttleman, who led the artist program, we wound up having this great relationship, and did the James Newton Howard and Friends album. James Howard, David, and I wound up doing demos at NAMM shows using all their keyboards, and we wound up being the guys who introduced the DX7 when it came out a couple of years later. So it's always been a great relationship. Yeah. They've always taken really good care of me.
And the use of FM and DX7s and so on in your sound over the years, did you, it always came across that you were very Yamaha centric, but in reality in the studio, was that always the case?
We always used a lot of Yamaha, sure. You know what I mean? Like I said, I kind of got burnt out on that FM and DX7 sound, but we used a lot of that. I used a lot. I used my TX816 modules quite a bit. Kind of wound up being a writing technique of mine where I would, have a lot of the same sounds, a lot of the same kind of Rhodes sounds, and they're repeated. I just would do presets with different pitch bend amounts and send program changes. So, you know, I would do these different kind of techniques in the studio where, you know, I would bend different synths at the same time, where individual notes could have different pitch bend ranges, and kind of do some steel guitar kind of things, and you know, like that.
Yeah,
different weird stuff. But I've kind of grown out of it. You know, the thing about the GS1 that should be mentioned, I mean, first of all, it's a bummer that there is no poly aftertouch coming out of it. That was always a big deal. A lot of synths that have poly aftertouch, it is not transmitted via MIDI, such as the case with the GS1. But dig, the GS1 has poly aftertouch on not only the release of all the notes, where you could just push down harder on one note of a string chord and just that note would release a little bit longer, but also the decay times. If you used poly aftertouch, the individual aftertouch on a key, if it hadn't gone through its decay cycle, you could actually increase it polyphonically with aftertouch. Just on paper, amazing. I wish it was a different synth, to be honest with you, that you were doing it with.
Yeah.
But I had to geek out there for a second.
So, someone in the chat room asked, seeing as you're obviously a fan of the GS1, did you ever get to use the GS2? It was from Himalayan Voices asked that question.
Yes, I did. And I actually got to have, you know, Yamaha supposedly had 4 programmers for the GS1, and I had one at the Manor for a while. It was these 4 TV screens. And supposedly, rumor has it, or the word was that Yamaha destroyed them all. They didn't want to have to fix them. But I actually got to have my hands on a program. It was very strange. You would program 3 notes at a time going up the keyboard. It was this very weird system of programming. But luckily, like I said, Gary Leuenberger, he was a master at it, and he dialed in those sounds on Africa that I've never been able to come close to getting those sounds on anything else.
So that's how he got those sounds. He used that programmer.
Absolutely. He had access to one at the time, and he tweaked for David and I. We were there with him, and those kalimba sounds at the beginning there, kalimba marimba sounds, he dialed in. That was with 4 operator FM, you know, on a GS1.
I'm just trying to find a picture, because I'm not entirely sure if everyone's seen what this programmer looked like. It's an incredible thing, but unfortunately I'm struggling to find. I'll find one later and bring it up. I want to turn the conversation now to kind of what you're doing and have been doing for I don't know, quite some time now, and that's scoring. You're scoring for TV and films. But before I kind of get onto what you've been doing with that, I have a question from a friend of mine called Joe O'Connor, who wanted to know, because not a lot of people, I don't think, know this, that Toto soundtracked the movie Dune, the David Lynch version. And of course, Dune has now come out again. Can you tell us a little bit about the process that you guys went through to soundtrack that first iteration? And have you heard, anything from the second one? And what are your thoughts?
Oh boy! Well, first of all, I'm so anxious to see the second one. I can't wait to hear what Hans does. I'm sure it's going to be amazing, and it just looks amazing. When we did Dune, this is pre-CGI. It's like with the music videos. So much of the stuff we did back then is just unwatchable. You know what I mean? It hurts my eyes how horrible it all is. And kind of soon after we stopped doing that, all of a sudden CGI comes on the scene, and all this stuff looks so cool. And I that was, for me personally, was a missed opportunity. I had no thought of doing film scores or being able to. I was a huge fan, always have been, of Jerry Goldsmith and of film scores in general. I've always listened to a lot. And, Toto was in a weird in-between place. We had done Toto IV, and then in a lot of ways, the shit hit the fan, and we were switching singers, and all the stuff that you should not do after you've, when you should be hitting while the iron's hot.
Yeah.
We decide to make personnel changes and do a fucking movie. You know what I mean? Welcome to another episode of What Were You Thinking? We have just one question. What were you thinking? No, and we were fans, especially Lukather was a huge fan of David Lynch's, so that was a great opportunity. My brother Jeff had built a studio right after Toto IV, just a block away from where I am right now. Right. He had this beautiful recording studio that we were had become our home base, and we were all set up in. And we got to spend a good month with David Lynch every day, hanging out with David Lynch. And just what a creative, amazing personality. It was so much fun. I remember I learned, a big lesson for everyone, that I learned at the time. David became obsessed with this Eno. There was this Eno piece they had temped in there. Some Eno thing he had done with his brother and with someone else. And
Daniel Lanois, wasn't it?
It was what they call the water theme.
Yeah.
And I was big Mr. Synth guy then, right? Right off of Toto IV. And I was thinking quite a bit of myself at the time. And, and I heard that thing and I thought, oh, shit, I could do that in my sleep. Are you kidding? No problem. Well, it turned out I would have needed to be in my sleep to do it because I never came close to replacing that. You know what I mean? They wound up licensing it for the movie. It was this very cool thing. And you know what I mean? I had to learn just the way I was. I mean, to this day, it's still true where just my brain moves too fast. And I don't mean that necessarily in a good way all the time for ambient music,
Sure.
My brain wants something else to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sooner than it should.
Yeah.
And if you're doing really cool ambient music, and I believe me, right after that, I gained this whole new respect for guys that do it well, and who is the master but Brian Eno, and for all of his work since then. You know what I mean? I really became a huge fan of everything he does, production wise. Just what he brings to the table. That X factor now with bands, you know what I mean? To this day, what he brings to the table is so amazing and so cool.
Absolutely.
I would say the same for Daniel Lanois as well.
Yeah.
I think he sometimes gets overlooked because of Eno's greatness, which is obvious, but he also is just a master.
Yeah,
absolutely. That Peter Gabriel Stowe album was just life changing. It's all I listened to for the longest time. It's all I listened to for that was the that's what we were all shooting for, something that good, that cool, that commercial, and yet at the same time so hip.
So before we move on to your current, I have found a picture of the GS1.
All right,
look at that. That's amazing, cool, isn't it?
Yeah,
4 little screws, just. Yeah, and we've actually got Manny Fernandez in the chat. Manny was instrumental in many of the sounds from the DX7 Mark II onwards. So the SYs and beyond. And he was saying that there are some examples in California somewhere. There's a GS1 and a GS2 programmer somewhere around. So maybe
no kidding.
Yeah, so
very interesting. I'd be very interested in that. I heard they were destroyed. I'd be very interested in that because I've had a lot of people coming after me asking about these sounds, and I'd be very interested in knowing about that. I've stayed in touch with Gary Leuenberger, the guy who I don't know if he'd remember how to program that stuff. But,
well, I would love to get him and Don Lewis on the show at the same time because they did.
That'd be very cool. Don would know a lot of this. He would know a lot about these guys I'm talking about and his relationship with Yamaha over the years.
Oh, yeah, because I interviewed him for Sound on Sound about a year or so ago because he had that movie made about him. which is a fantastic movie. If you've not seen The Ballad of Don Lewis, go and see it. It's a cracking film.
Yes, I've seen part of it. I haven't seen the whole thing yet.
It's great.
I did start watching and I saw it online.
Yeah, it's absolutely superb. Once we finished the interview, I indulged myself as I do and started geeking about Yamaha and DXs, and he had some great stories and some really good information. So we do need to try and get those guys on at some point. So let's talk about what Steve Porcaro is doing now. So you soundtracked 78 episodes of Justified.
Yes,
you've been doing some amazing work. Is that where you are now? Are you
no,
now?
Not at all.
Okay, tell me why. Tell me what.
Not at all. No, my friend James Howard, a bunch of years ago when I was home and I would help him out on stuff. I was kind of just doing this and that, and I would help James occasionally on a movie, and we were working on something. I forgot what it was. And he turned to me and he says, "Do you want to do this?" And I was like, "What do you mean? Writing the film?" He says, "Yeah." I said, I really don't know if I could have music done by Thursday. You know what I mean? I'd never, Toto's schedules and deadlines were always very fluid. And I don't know. I didn't know if I had that kind of discipline. Well, it turns out not only was I able to deliver, but I loved it. I loved it for a while. I loved writing to film. And like a lot of things in my life, right out of the gate, I was very, very lucky and successfully got a bunch of gigs right out of the gate when I first started. But then I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot to do the kind of work I wanted to do. And, right before, I guess a couple of years before Toto asked me to tour, I got the Justified gig. And that was a great gig. And that was, great producers, great writers, a great show, a show I wasn't embarrassed of. And they loved what I did. And I had a blast doing it. And then for 4 years there, I did double duty. I would go from touring with Toto to doing a season of Justified. I mean, I was in heaven. It just was, I'd get a month in between each one to reconnect with family. But then I had this great show that was fantastic for a long time. And but I found myself, when I finished up with Toto, I found myself in the unique position of, and look at COVID happened. And so it kind of wound up being moot, but I told the guys I didn't want to tour anymore. It pissed them off. Things were going really well. I just was starting to forget my key commands. I was starting to forget hard-earned, stuff that I spent a lot of time learning. And I just started forgetting about this stuff. And it was really starting to upset me. And I just was longing for my studio. I love my studio. I love my room. And suddenly, right now, I found myself in a position where I don't have to get a gig. I don't have to work. I still work very hard every day, but I'm able to do whatever the fuck I want to do.
Which is a great place to be in.
I got to tell you, I don't know how long it's going to last. And I believe in myself. Believe me, my biggest successes, songs like Human Nature and stuff, were written when I was just doing whatever the fuck I wanted to do. Was when I just was being the best version of myself I could be. I wasn't writing that for anybody or whatever. So believe me, I come into work every day, and because I want to be able to keep living my life like this, I definitely have want to impose deadlines on myself. That's what I loved about film work. When you're in a studio like this, all of us, I see your rooms there and all the synths around you. There's so many shiny objects going by you. When writing a song gets hard, when there's that bridge that's not quite working out, or how do I get it to go back to the verse or the chorus, or that third verse lyric just sucks. And it's when what we do for a living becomes work, actual work, I'm easily distracted. Oh, there's a new synth out. Oh, great. There's a new library of this. You know what I mean? And I'm downloading it and looking at it. And is it going to make my life easier? And it's hard to finish stuff without a deadline, you know? And that's what film gave me, was a deadline. It had to be done by Thursday. And I loved it. And it kind of made me grow up. It kind of made me grow up where sometimes I actually had to come into the studio when I didn't feel like it, you know?
Yeah.
I'm used to feeling like it all the time. You know what I mean? I love the studio, but you know what? There would be those times where your friends are going out to dinner saying, come on, or your kids want you to spend some time with them, and you really want to, but you've got to deliver, you know, Thursday is tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you've got 3 cues to write that you haven't even started yet, and you have to work. And it's not fun and games. It's not a new synth, a new, you know what I mean, a new soft synth, a new, let's see what this does. Sometimes it's work, and it's film work enabled me to grow up. But right this second, I'm able to do whatever I want to do, and it's been great. I've been able to take old motifs, old things that I just will not go away, that have been haunting me, that have been dying to be finished, that have been dying to just be a complete piece of music, and I've been able to finish them. It feels amazing.
Yeah.
So how does your approach differ from, say, like, you know, the session work that you've done versus sitting down in your own studio to compose and record? What is your thought process, and how does that work in comparison?
Well, and by the way, I just did a session for a friend. I just did some keyboards on a tune for a friend. And it's very different. I mean, of course, you love the fact that, you know what, I'm on my turf. I can do it my way. I've got all my synths. I've got there's not just some rig I've brought down to a studio where I have a limited amount of stuff. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it kind of relates to what I just was talking about, where when you're down there at the studio and you've got to get it done now, there's no thinking about it. You know, I like to, you know, this is another thing about having the studio at home. I know a lot of guys that have their own studios, but they're not at home. You know, I need to, again, if I'm writing for film or whatever, there's some times where I'm drawing a blank or something. I need to be able to come in after dinner and finish working on something. I don't want to have to leave my home to go back to the studio, to have to drive to wherever my studio is to finish what I'm working on. I like to, when my ears are fresh, it's huge. It's something I lost the hearing completely in one of my ears from a surgery some years ago. And, you know, my one good ear, my right ear, gets overwhelmed very easily. And I just love looking at things when I'm fresh, you know, whether that means taking a nap or looking at it fresh the next day. Kind of what's right or wrong with things becomes obvious to me. You know, what something needs becomes obvious to me. I'm not going, is this working? Is that sound cutting through? Is this speaking right? Is that the right part? When I'm fresh, it's obvious to me. Throw it out. I just need to redo it. Or, you know what? It's fine. It just needs this. When I'm fresh, it's obvious to me. So I need my studio close by.
Sure.
Yeah. I you know, very much feel the same. And I think a lot of us, you know, I've done a lot of live work, and so that was very easy because these, just as you said, with, you know, composing for TV or film or other things, you got deadlines, you got to deal with it. Like, it just gets done, and whatever it is, it's going to be that. But recording at home, there's always that kind of struggle of staying on track. I mean, but you don't want to lose the advantages that you have, like being able to go down some of those rabbit holes with programming or creating those sounds. Sure. So I think that's a very relevant topic as far as like music being made in 2021. I mean, there's so many people, especially right now with all that we're going through, is like, how do we keep on track in doing our recording? So it's great to hear you talk about that.
Sure. But there is something to be said for you know what? Even if it's a little uncomfortable, even if you've got to buck up and focus, getting it done. Here we are. We're here. Let's do it. Let's make these decisions now. You know what I mean? It kind of relates to the old days when you just would be on 24-track tape and you had one track left and you're doing a guitar solo. And do you go over that guitar solo, or do you risk punching in, or is that one good enough? Where now it's all about when and where you make the decisions. You know what I'm saying? Now we've got all the tracks in the world. The kids nowadays do not have that discussion about tracks, right? They've all got all the tracks in the world. So the guitar player can do 50 passes of the guitar solo, but then when are you going to put that together? When are you going to splice you know what I mean? When are you going to combine it and comp it? Do you want to do it now, or do you want to do it later? And, we're able to put things off, but sometimes that's not a good thing. Sometimes you want to get shit done, and there's something to be said for having to make those decisions then.
Yeah.
So speaking of things that are being worked on, like we've seen that your family is quite musically talented, and that being multi-generational with your father, you and your brothers, but also tell us about your daughter and Heather's music stuff now.
Boy, Heather just doesn't stop. Heather's, she's a Renaissance artist. She's, I just was looking at some of her videos today. She makes, I couldn't be prouder of her, you know what I mean? And she keeps plugging away. Mickey's plays drums and piano. My youngest daughter, Mickey. But yeah, I couldn't be prouder of my kids, Heather's got this unique thing, and she's, I used to, be so worried about, I would go and see my friends play at the Baked Potato every weekend, and then I would leave just beating myself up over what I didn't have together. You got to get your jazz chops together. You know what I mean? Just beating myself up. And, it took me a long time, but to finally go, you know what? There's only one of you, Steve. And you know what I mean? There's plenty of guys who are great jazz players. Let them be great jazz players. I just started focusing on it's why, some of those techniques you talked about, why I want to bring some of that stuff back, because, that was my thing. Those were my hot licks. Those were what separated me from everybody else. And the kind of songs I write, I used to beat myself up for writing a lot of the same kind of songs. I mean, you know what? I'm kind of okay with that now. I like those kind of songs, and it's easy and fun for me. It's like falling off a log for me, and that's the stuff you want. You know what I mean? When someone struggles all the time with something, I mean, it's fine with them trying, but if it's not really their bag, they probably should, be looking for something else that, not to not challenge ourselves, but believe me, I do plenty of that just in doing what I'm good at, is challenging to me, so, but I'm liking to focus on what I do good, on what comes easy to me and what's fun for me. And that just so happens to be stuff that makes me unique. You know what I mean? I think that makes me different from everyone else out there. So I've gotten better at focusing on that.
Cool. Will we see a follow-up to the solo album at all?
Absolutely. Cool. That's always I'm always writing songs. I'm always finishing songs. I'm always hoping some great singer, some great artist that's out there and on the road and has a huge record deal and accidentally hears one of them and wants to do it. That's always my wish. But in the meantime, I will, I'm compiling songs and to do another solo album, whether it's me singing on it or not. I mean, the less I sing, the better as far as I'm concerned. But, I'll always be compiling the next solo album.
Yeah, you talked about people coming along with record deals and stuff to work on your songs, but fairly recently there was this whole thing with Weezer in Africa, and didn't you join them on stage on Jimmy Kimmel?
I did. I did. That was fun. They were real
yeah.
sweet guys, you know. Yeah, Africa was just exploding for some unknown reason. You know what I mean?
And rightly so.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
And rightly so. And you know, Lukather and I have always had to admit that we didn't think it should be on the album.
It's the last track, isn't it? It's the last track on the album.
It's the last track. Who puts their only #1 single as the last track on the album? Seriously.
It keeps people there till the end, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Seriously, right? It's crazy. I mean, I worked my ass off on it. There was all kinds of things that didn't wind up on the things I did with the Polyfusion, weird gating stuff I did with the micro composer, letting loops through, you know, VCAs. I did all kinds of stuff that didn't wind up on the record, but I sure didn't think that was ever going to be a single or should even be on the record. You know, I thought that was. We all thought that was David being indulgent. You know, trying to be a better lyricist than he was. But you know, who can argue with? At the end of the day, it's made a whole lot of people happy.
Yeah,
you know?
It's one of those songs that, and I don't want to compare it to others. I've got something in my head, and I think if I make that comparison, then I might offend some people. But the lyrics are slightly odd, but they work. It's you know, what I'm going to compare it to is We Built the City, because that's the kind of universally kind of despised song, except it's one of the best pop rock songs ever. I mean, it's just so catchy. I love it myself.
Bernie Taupin on lyrics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that wasn't, you know, that was
crazy.
Them trying to be better lyrically, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
But the thing I remember with Africa, and this is, I'm going to go back now to. It was not long after it came out, and I remember sitting up late, as I often did in the early hours, listening to pirate radio stations over here in the UK that would come across from ships in the North Sea. And every now and again, you'd get a bit boring, and you'd flick through, and you'd come across one of the late or early morning BBC channels, and there was a program on there that used to analyze song lyrics, and it would play snippets of the song, and then people would, you know, repeat the words and the lyrics and try and analyze them. And I have this memory of them doing Africa one night, and just my mind, Africa was 82, so I was about 12, and my mind was just like, what the hell is this all about? But put the record on, and it's, you know, it's just a superb piece of music. I mean, yeah, it works. It just works. And even my
I think
kids
some of
know
it has to do with it's not really pop lyrics. It's very spiritual. And
almost,
as I've heard, at least, you know, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but it sounds very spiritual as I've heard David describe it. But whatever it is, I love it.
Yeah, and it crosses the generations as well, doesn't it? Because my kids are, my youngest is 15, going 16, and he knows it. He knows it inside out. And I think, where the hell did you hear it? And he's just heard it somewhere because it's been, you know, it pops up on YouTube or something. And there's all these parodies and things. But he just knows the song, and he loves the song. He absolutely loves it. And he's 16, you know.
I know we're getting a little closer to the end here, and Steve, you've been so awesome, and we've like grilled the heck out of you, and all of us have really enjoyed this. Yeah. One thing that I was curious about, you know, I've so enjoyed hearing you talk, and I've you know, watched some other interviews with you. You know, the struggle that you have, like, on working on things and yourself, and, you know, how you create music and that whole process. But one thing that has really struck me is your relationship with, you know, other people and, you know, your other band members and Toto, and how you're just all the time so generous in how you talk about them and the relationship you have. I mean, you know, just earlier talking about the partnership that you had with David, and how, you know, how great Lukather is, and you know, the role that everybody played together. And what's kind of your secret? Because a lot of electronic musicians are just making music by themselves, but when you work in a band, what is the secret to your success in Toto?
Yeah, it's just there's a chemistry there that is undeniable. I mean, believe me, we all you know, have you all get the desire to go solo when you want to do a song and the other guys don't want to do it, or it's not right for it. I mean, I played Human Nature for the guys in Toto, and they said they wanted to go more towards stadium rock, you know, and it wound up, thank God, you know.
Yeah.
That wound up, that had a nice ending, but a lot of times you go away and it's hard. It's difficult to compromise and to have your feelings hurt. And, you know, it wasn't easy being in a band with one and then two brothers. Sometimes there's, you know, I mean, everyone admires them as musicians and so do I, but there's still brother shit there and, challenges and, yeah, but there's always been, though, this undeniable chemistry. You know what I mean? You know, it's funny you talk about how do you and David, you know, you know, distribute the parts. People would be surprised how much synth stuff David Page did, how good he was with synths and stuff. He just loved having me around. We just loved elevating things to a certain point. You know, so again, just to answer your question, you know, I think we've always been aware. You know, Lukather has done plenty of solo albums. You know, he's been able to go, screw you guys. And, you know, the band kind of ends at a certain point and he goes out on the road and he puts out a solo album and he does everything exactly the way he wants to do things. And he's the boss. And it seems that after that, he kind of comes back to Toto. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He comes back and there's just something that's undeniable about that chemistry and the amount of people we're able to reach as Toto. You know, tons of bands go through this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, even if you're the guy who wrote all the songs and you sang it all and some of these guys go solo and it's like, you know what? The chemistry's gone, you know? Hit records and a band being successful, there's a chemistry. The stars align. Sometimes it can be very difficult. It can be a very difficult chemistry. You know what I mean? Part of that chemistry is bumping heads in a way that's a drag, you know?
Yeah.
But when you have that chemistry, when you've created something, you know, when whatever the push and pull was, the chemistry was just right, like it was on the fourth Toto album, you know, it's undeniable, you know? Absolutely. It's undeniable. And everybody appreciates it and likes it. And you cut through. You get to that point where you know what I'm saying? I can't tell you, doing the sessions that we did, how many times we'd play on something and you go, man, this is going to be huge. This guy is going to be the next big thing. And then you never hear from them again. You know, whether it was their uncle who was their manager who pissed off the record company and, you know, just the stars were not aligned. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's happened more times than I can name, you know, than I can think of. The stars have to align to really have some real successful. Now, for other people, maybe it's real easy. You know what I mean? Maybe they go, "What is he talking about?" I come out, I play my songs, I'm Ed Sheeran, and people love it. And it's that easy. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But for us, it was, you know, it was what it was, and I don't, and I appreciate it. I'll be forever grateful to the band, to the guys, for letting me be part of it. You know.
Yeah. Do you keep in touch with Paige at all? And
all the time.
Yeah,
very much.
Any chance of you two working together again?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely. He's in his own studio. He's got someone he works with. He does a whole lot of stuff on his own right now. He doesn't, you know, need me as much, you know, as he did. You know, especially with technology, he's gotten to a point, and he's very busy doing his own thing, but we're always in touch. We're always in touch, and I would love to.
Well, from this fan, please do. It would be amazing. Absolutely amazing. Guys, have you got any more questions that you want to throw in?
There was a couple of questions from the chat.
Oh yeah.
Torsten asked.
Can I? Sorry, before you do that, can I just? I'm just going to go and take care of something. I was just going to put you on
Yeah, no
3-shot. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Torsten asked, in all the synthesizers that you've used through your career, what has had the most lasting impact on you? Which is your most revered?
Probably CS80.
Yeah.
Probably the CS80, CS80 Mini Moog. You know what I mean? But the CS80 was a real axe to me, and I didn't realize how much until it was gone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then it was kind of like, wait a minute. I know we're moving along here. Especially you got caught in that thing being where everything, you wanted everything to talk to the computer or everything to talk to the switcher or whatever.
Yeah.
Everything was able to talk to a computer, and the CS80 didn't. So it kind of got left aside. But that was, it took me seriously, it was like a couple of years before I was all of a sudden like, hey, what happened to my axe? You're a synth player where stuff's changing so much all the time. I actually had an axe.
Have you come across the Hydrosynth? Have you experienced
I have come across it. Yeah, and that's another thing to talk about is things with poly aftertouch.
Yeah.
Just because they say they have poly aftertouch, there was something about the Yamaha stuff, the CS80, and especially the GS1 as well, where the way they implemented poly aftertouch, there was something just incredibly musical and useful about it. Now, I haven't actually played a Hydrosynth, so I don't want to make like that doesn't have it, that its poly aftertouch isn't nice. But I've used a lot of other things. My Kurzweil MIDI board that had all these tweaks on it for depth and how much and you know what I mean, had all kinds of controls for the poly aftertouch, and yet I never could get it to come close to the beauty of my CS80 or my GS1 as far as playability goes.
Yeah.
Do you think it had something to do with just how, it had those very long keys? In fact, actually, it just said the key balance. Do you think that played into it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Kent's
all those things you're talking about, I'm sure. But the Kurzweil MIDI board that had that's keys were as long.
Yeah.
And I never got it to respond, to be as musical, to feel as natural, and the GS1 and CS80, believe me, programming wise, maybe if you were way under the hood with it, but externally there wasn't. The Yamaha, the CS80 had this great control as far as the upper and lower ranges of the keyboard and how bright or how much filter or how much amplifier, how much louder or softer the sounds got. But those are very cool controls. But there just was this inherent musicality, especially as far as the aftertouch went, which I find rare.
Yeah. Also, Kent, who's somewhat of a CS80 expert, surprisingly asks about the Rhodes Chroma. What was your experience with the Chroma like?
I never had a Chroma. That was one of the few synths in those days that I did not have. A lot of friends of mine, Randy Kerber, other guys were way into the Chroma. I've heard people talk really fondly of it and what a cool, deep synthesizer it was. But that was one I skipped.
Okay. Did anybody ask about the Hydrosynth?
I did.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
I'm
trying to get my hands on one, actually.
Yeah, try one. I've got one. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I hear they're very cool.
Whilst you were chatting, I had a photograph come in from Manny Fernandez. This is him with another one of those programs. I'm going to put you and Steve, I'm going to put you and Manny in touch with each other because Manny's out there in California.
Fantastic.
He knows the rumor. He's investigating where this programmer might be. So maybe you two can hook up, and who knows. I know Manny's been working with or mediating between Yamaha and Reinhold Heil to get his VP1 fixed, and he managed to source these parts from Yamaha that even Yamaha didn't even know they had, and they just looked in a cupboard somewhere and there's a box with just the required number of parts. It was quite
fantastic. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
you may have even run into him in the past at the Yamaha Center in Winter Park too.
Yeah, and at NAMM as well. You know, he's very well known in the Yamaha circles. I'm sure you probably
No doubt.
Cool.
Sure know who he is.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Have we got anything? Have we ticked everything off our list?
I noticed that. Sorry.
No.
This is just me being nosy, right? I watched an interview. I watched an interview with you in 2009, and in the rack, the way your studio was configured, in the rack to your left, which I presume gets a lot of use, there was a Virus B in there, and I was wondering if you still had it, and what was your thoughts on it?
You know, I do still have it. I love my Virus B. I actually read the manual to my Virus B twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the way I thought the Virus B sounded amazing. I just loved the it was in your face. I love that synth. I actually still have it. The only reason I've gotten it up recently, I've gotten the audio up recently, was bringing up some old sequences, some old songs I'm trying to finish, and they use the Virus B live, not a soft synths version, but the actual one. Yeah, I love the Virus B. I was the way I like to learn a synth, and the way I was trying to learn the Virus B was to edit, to be able to go in and kind of reverse engineer things, and the Virus B would have these great sounds, and I just would want to be like, okay, now where's that slap coming from? Where's that delay coming from? And I just want to control the speed of it, or I want to control the speed of the LFOs or something. How do I get in there at what page? And it was a little difficult. You know what I mean? It was a little elusive to me, but what a great sounding synth.
Yeah. I think it was the best out of the entire Virus range.
I'm glad I put onto it.
Two of them. The keyboard one was especially nice, but when I run out of some space, I got the rack mounted one, and I had that for quite a good few years. Like, it was a great synth.
Great.
I upgraded to the TI2 and then wish I hadn't, because it wasn't as good.
Right? Best intentions, right?
Yeah.
It's sometimes these guys, they've always got to move, forward. They want to have another product out and stuff, but sometimes they took a few steps backwards.
Yeah, definitely, I think. Yeah.
I keep mentioning Manny, but he's coming up with some good stuff here. He wants to ask you, Steve, he recalls from an old Keyboard magazine interview that you gave your Polyfusion a nickname. If so, what was it?
Well, just so, I used to do a whole lot of sessions, and there was so much of the Polyfusion, and I didn't always need it all taken all the time. So, for instance, this guy back here is, you can see on the one side there, it's named Rudis.
Okay. After Jordan.
Most of them, Paich named them. There was Ramses, and there was some, I guess, Greek names or something. My micro composer was Phoebus, and anyway, I could just tell the cartridge guys is when I was doing sessions, just bring Ramses and this and that, and they would know which
there's a method to it, yeah,
which chunk to bring.
Superb. Well, I think we've come
we
to
good?
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Great, guys.
Steve, it's just been an absolute pleasure. It really, really has, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us this evening. It's so appreciated. And I'm made up. I'm going to go to sleep a really happy guy tonight. So thank you.
I feel as though we've minded the life out of him, but I suppose that's the point.
Great.
No.
Rob, you've got my information. I'm easy to get a hold of.
Yeah, I will do. I promise I won't hassle you too much. Thank you again, Steve. And I think we've had so many compliments in the chat room tonight about the interview and the stories and the information, and thanks for answering all the questions, both ours and for the audience as well. So, brilliant. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Before we go, let's just remind everyone. So first of all, do this: subscribe and hit the bell. I know I keep asking, and I'm going to stop once we hit 1,000 subscribers. I'm going to stop asking because that's all I really want, just little things. If you want to donate to the channel, please do. The link is in the description underneath the video, but it's there on the screen now. Every little helps keep this channel running. We don't make any profit from this. It's all community based, and we're just so honoured to have great guests, and we can continue to do that if we keep going. And of course, you can follow us on all of the social media channels. Our name is the same across the board at Synth Network. And of course, you can find us on the Facebook page. And again, thank you for being a part of that Facebook page as well, Steve. Your contributions there are also incredibly welcome. In terms of guests, well, let's see who have we got coming up in the next few weeks. So next week we've got Kent Spong back on. So Kent, obviously preeminent synthesizer technician. Hopefully he'll be able to join us next week and talk us through the stuff that he's had in and out of his doors in the last few weeks. Following that, on October 22nd, we've got one of the greatest synth designers of certainly recent times. Mr. Axel Hartmann will be joining us, who's designed some amazing pieces of technology, either under his own name or for many other people besides. So we've got him coming on October 22nd. And then October 29th, we're going to be joined again by Mick McNeil, formerly of Simple Minds. And we had him on very early on in our life, and the stream wasn't that good back then, but hopefully we'll get a much improved version of that. November 5th, we've got Tim Dorney of Republica fame. November 12th, hey Mike, I think you're still in the chat room. This guy, Mike Metley, Dr. Mike Metley, no less, hugging his Korg prophecy, as everyone should if you've got one. Mike has put together this amazing book called Synth Gems 1. It's out now. It's shipping as we speak. It's this wonderful, big, glossy, hardback, coffee table style book with pictures and stories about some of the most amazing synthesizers out there. Dr. Mike will be joining us on the show on November 12th. And then we've also got Thomas Gabrands of CME joining us on November 26th. And of course, CME are the guys behind the Bluetooth MIDI technology called WIDI. And we're hopefully going to be debuting a whole bunch of new additions to that range. And also, they've promised us a Black Friday special offer. So if you want to get in on that, November 26th, we'll have Thomas joining us. And if Zhao in Singapore can get up at 3 a.m. in the morning, he'll be joining us there as well. And we're tossing around some ideas for Christmas and New Year, for the month of December, basically, whether we're going to do some like big group sessions or maybe do a kind of retrospective of the year. But yeah, lots of ideas. If you've got any ideas, let us know in the Facebook group. Thank you again to everybody. Thanks to Steve. Thanks to Ben. Thanks to Chris. Thanks to everybody in the audience and in the chat room tonight. You guys have been amazing. We do it for you. We love you. Thank you very much. We'll be back same time, same place next week. Until then, take the greatest of care. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Get a jab if you haven't had one. And we'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care, guys.